At Christmas dinner, my dad pushed me out of my seat. His hand came down on the back of the chair, sharp and sudden, and the edge hit my leg before I hit the floor. The sound of the wine glass rolling off the table filled the silence, followed by laughter. It wasn't nervous laughter. It was real, full, delighted. I looked up from the marble floor and saw my stepmom's face, her perfect smile framed by the glow of the chandelier. Dad's voice came next, flat and cold. Move to the side. This chair belongs to your stepmother. If you're listening to this, tell me where you are right now. Maybe you're cooking, driving, or sitting in your own quiet kitchen. For me, I was in that room, staring at my family while they laughed at me. That was the moment everything changed. I stood up slowly, brushed the dust from my dress, and felt my blood run cold. The warmth of the fire in the next room meant nothing. I could feel the wine soaking into the hem of my skirt, the sting on my knee where I had fallen. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Around me, conversation resumed. Laughter returned, as if my humiliation had been a short commercial break in their evening. My dad straightened his tie and said under his breath, "Don't make a scene." I didn't. I said nothing. I walked past the long dining table, past the glowing Christmas tree that smelled of pine and candle wax, past faces that avoided mine. The room shimmered in gold light and soft jazz music. Every sound felt distant. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I crossed to the door. I reached for my coat and stepped outside without looking back. The cold night air hit my face like a slap. Snow fell softly on the driveway, the kind that sticks to your lashes and makes the world seem quieter than it really is. My car was dusted white. I opened the door with trembling hands, sat behind the wheel, and stared at the house through the windshield. Behind those windows, my family was still laughing, eating, toasting to their perfect Christmas. Inside, my chair was gone, and with it, whatever piece of belonging I had left. I started the car and backed out of the driveway. The road stretched ahead, empty and silent. The wipers scraped the windshield, push away flakes of snow as I drove through the neighborhood. Every house I passed glowed warm with light. I imagined families inside, telling stories, making toasts, and I wondered how many of them were pretending too. By the time I reached the city, it was almost 10:30 at night. The highway was quiet, the snow swirling in the headlights. I turned onto West Armitage Avenue and parked in front of my apartment. The engine ticked as it cooled, and for a long time, I didn't move. I could still feel the chair under me, the push, the sound of laughter echoing like a song I couldn't turn off. Inside, my apartment felt smaller than usual, but safe. I hung my coat on the hook, slipped off my heels, and walked barefoot across the wooden floor. The air was still and cool. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. The surface was scratched, uneven, nothing like the gleaming mahogany one at Dad's house. But it was mine. Every imperfection in it felt honest. I stared at my reflection in the window. My makeup had smudged. Mascara was faint under my eyes. I looked like someone else. Someone I didn't recognize yet. My stepmom's perfume still clung to my sleeve. That sharp, artificial sweetness she always left behind, like a signature. I rubbed at it with a napkin, but the smell lingered. It wasn't the first time she had made me feel small, but it was the first time Dad had helped her do it. That thought made my throat tighten. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, letting the memory rewind. The invitation had come 2 weeks earlier, written in her looping script but signed in Dad's handwriting. "We would love for you to join us for Christmas dinner," it said. "Formal attire, 6 o'clock. I almost didn't go. I spent days debating it. But the part of me that still believed in family won. When I arrived, the house looked like a postcard. Candles in every window. A massive tree trimmed in gold. Laughter spilling from the living room. Diana opened the door herself, wearing a red silk dress that matched the wine she held. She smiled, but her eyes looked at me the way a jeweler examines a flawed diamond. "Annie, you made it," she said. David appeared behind her, his arms sliding around her waist. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," he said, like nothing had ever gone wrong between us. Dinner started pleasantly enough. The table was set with fine china, the kind that only came out for holidays. The guests were mostly Diana's friends and business acquaintances. They talked about art shows and new restaurants, their laughter crisp and rehearsed. I smiled when I needed to, nodded when spoken to, and kept my voice light. David raised a glass to toast new beginnings, his words smooth but hollow. When he looked at me, his eyes slid away too quickly. Then came the seating. The chair beside him had always been mine, from childhood to the year Mom passed. It wasn't a throne, just a simple cherrywood chair with a small scratch near one leg, a mark I'd made as a kid swinging my feet under the table. It had belonged to Mom before that, and to her mother before her. When I saw it empty, I hesitated. Maybe he had saved it for me. Maybe this was his way of making peace. I pulled the chair out slowly and sat down. The conversation dimmed, like someone had turned down the volume. I could feel the air shift. Diana's hand froze on her wine glass. She looked at Dad. He looked at her. Then at me. What happened next will stay with me forever. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped low, hard enough to cut the air. Move to the side, Annie. That chair belongs to your stepmother. It didn't sound like him. It sounded like a stranger wearing his voice. I didn't move at first. For a second, I thought it was a cruel joke. Then his hand came down on the chair. The push wasn't violent, just certain, like a decision already made. I hit the floor, my hand catching the edge of the rug. Someone gasped, then laughed. The laughter spread like fire catching dry leaves. I looked up at him, waiting for him to help me, to realize what he had done. But he just adjusted his cufflink and said, "Don't embarrass yourself." Diana's smile returned, soft and satisfied. Now, sitting alone in my apartment, I could still feel the cold marble under my palms, still hear the echo of their laughter. It wasn't just about the chair. It was about everything that chair represented. The years of trying to belong in a house that no longer had room for me. The silence I'd mistaken for peace. The family that had turned into an audience. Outside, the snow kept falling, the city lights blurring behind it. I pressed my forehead to the glass and whispered to no one, "It's just a chair." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. If you've ever sat at a table where you didn't belong, if you've ever been told to move aside in your own family, you'll understand. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Are you in your kitchen? Your car? Maybe under a blanket trying to fall asleep? I'd like to know, because that night, when I walked out in silence, I thought I was walking away from my family. But what I was really walking toward was myself. Snow kept falling the next morning, covering the city like someone trying to erase what happened the night before. I woke up late, still wearing the same dress, its hem stained with a small brown mark where wine had splashed. For a while, I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint light slipping through the blinds. I told myself I should get up, shower, do something useful. But every time I moved, the memory of that push came back so vividly it made my chest tighten. I kept hearing his voice, saying not to embarrass myself. I kept seeing Diana's perfect smile. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the street disappear under the white blanket. The quiet outside reminded me of another morning, years ago. When the snow had meant something else entirely. When I was 7, Dad used to wake me before sunrise on the first snow of winter. He would lift me in his arms, wrap a blanket around my shoulders, and carry me out to the porch. We would watch the flakes drift down, silent and soft, while Mom made pancakes inside. That memory was warm enough to make me smile, even now. Back then, our house was smaller, painted blue, with a porch swing that creaked when the wind hit it. Dad always smelled of sawdust and aftershave, his arms strong from work at the construction company. He would tell me stories about how every building started with a line on paper. I believed him when he said nothing mattered more than family. Mom was the heart of that belief. She was the kind of woman who laughed easily, who turned every dinner into a small celebration. When she got sick, the house dimmed. The sounds changed. No more music from the kitchen. No laughter echoing down the hallway. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her hand, promising to look after Dad when she was gone. She squeezed my fingers weakly and told me he would need someone to remind him to keep living. I was 19 then, old enough to understand what dying meant, but not old enough to know how it had. Changes the people left behind. After her funeral, Dad threw himself into work. He was at the office before dawn, home long after dark. The first Christmas without her, I cooked dinner alone. I tried to make the same honey-glazed ham she loved, but it came out dry. Dad barely ate. He said he was tired, went to bed early, and left the dishes for me. I told myself it was grief, that time would soften him. But grief, I learned, does not make everyone softer. For him, it hardened into something like stone. I still visit every Sunday. I cleaned, cooked, and tried to talk about small things, like the new art exhibit downtown, or the plants in Mom's garden that were starting to die without her care. He would nod and say work was fine, then retreat to his office. The smell of her perfume lingered in that house for months, until one day, didn't. I remember opening her closet and realizing he had boxed up her clothes. That was when I started feeling like a guest instead of a daughter. It was about a year later that he called to tell me about a woman he met at a charity gala. Her name was Diana Brooks. He said she was from River North, worked in real estate, and had a way of making him laugh again. His voice sounded lighter, almost excited. I wanted to be happy for him, but a small part of me felt uneasy. The first time I met her was at a restaurant on Michigan Avenue. She arrived 10 minutes late, apologizing as if she were stepping onto a stage. She had that kind of presence. Her smile was polite, her tone warm, but every compliment she gave me felt slightly rehearsed. Dad couldn't stop looking at her. Over the next few months, she was everywhere. At family dinners, at company events, even at Mom's old church during a Sunday service. She took photos of the two of them and posted them online with captions about love and second chances. I noticed Dad started dressing differently, buying new suits, wearing cologne he had never used before. He laughed more, but it was a different kind of laugh, sharp around the edges. One evening, I stopped by their place unannounced. She opened the door in a silk robe and told me Dad was busy. I could see him through the hallway, reading something at his desk. When he finally came out, he looked irritated that I hadn't called first. That was the first time I felt like I was intruding on my own family. Things moved fast after that. Within 6 months, they announced their engagement. The ceremony was small, only a few close friends and relatives. I stood beside Dad while he said his vows, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow cross his face when he mentioned loyalty. Diana's eyes glistened, but they didn't look at him. They looked at the crowd. After they married, she moved into the house Mom had decorated. Almost immediately, she began changing everything. The floral wallpaper in the hallway disappeared. The photographs of me and Mom were replaced by modern art prints. Even the old cherry wood dining table where we used to eat Sunday breakfast was gone. When I asked about it, Dad said Diana wanted something new, something brighter. I swallowed my hurt and said nothing. Then one afternoon, I came by and saw her sitting in Mom's chair at the head of the table. She was drinking coffee, her nails painted crimson, her expression calm. I hesitated in the doorway, and she noticed. "Is something wrong, Annie?" she asked. I told her that it was Mom's chair. She laughed softly and said, "It's just a chair." When Dad came in, I expected him to defend me, or at least acknowledge what it meant. Instead, he said the same thing. "It's just a chair, Annie." That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep, a quiet wound that would take years to close. After that day, I visited less often. Every time I did, Diana found small ways to remind me that I no longer belonged. She corrected me when I talked about family traditions, saying things like, "We do it differently now." She called me dear in a tone that wasn't endearing at all. Adam, caught between us, chose silence. The distance grew until it felt permanent. Now, sitting in my apartment with the snow piling outside, I thought of all those moments that led to last night. None of it happened suddenly. It was a slow unraveling, one gesture at a time. I realized how much I had tried to keep something alive that had already changed beyond recognition. The city lights glowed faintly through the falling snow. Somewhere below, a car engine started, its sound fading into the distance. I picked up the photo on my desk, the one of me sitting on Dad's shoulders at a carnival when I was 8. His face was younger, his smile open and easy. I traced the outline of his hand on my shoulder and wondered if that warmth had been real, or if time had simply rewritten it for me. I set the photo down and looked around my apartment. The heater clicked, the clock ticked, life moving forward in small sounds. I told myself that maybe someday I would stop missing the people they used to be. For now, all I could do was breathe and let the snow keep falling. The first time I realized Diana had started controlling my dad was on a Sunday afternoon when I stopped by the house unannounced. I still had my key, but the lock had been changed. I stood on the porch, pressing the doorbell, while a camera above the door blinked red. When she finally opened it, she looked surprised to see me, holding a phone in one hand and a mug in the other. Her expression softened almost instantly into a practiced smile. "Annie, I didn't know you were coming," she said. Behind her, I could hear Dad's voice on the phone, firm, professional, not the voice I remembered from family dinners. She didn't invite me in right away. Instead, she asked if I could come back later because Dad was finishing an important call. I said I'd wait, but she told me there wasn't anywhere comfortable to sit because the new furniture hadn't arrived yet. That was a lie. I could see the new beige sofa behind her. I turned and left without arguing. A few days later, Dad called to apologize for the misunderstanding. He said Diana thought I would prefer to visit on weekends when things were quieter. The way he said it sounded rehearsed. I asked if everything was all right. He said yes, but his tone lacked conviction. I told him I missed talking like we used to. He paused before replying. "I'm proud of you, Annie. I really am. But you have your own life now." That sentence stayed in my mind for weeks. From then on, small changes started piling up. The home office that used to smell of sawdust and ink was redecorated with white marble accents and gold trim. The framed photo of me on Dad's desk disappeared, replaced by one of him and Diana at a company gala. When I asked where my picture had gone, he said she had moved it upstairs for safety while they renovated. I noticed other things too. He stopped mentioning his old business partner, Benton, a man he had known for 30 years. When I asked, he said Benton was retiring, though his voice carried an odd tension. Later, I learned from a mutual acquaintance that Benton had been quietly pushed out after a disagreement about budgets. The company, now managed primarily by Dad and Diana, was shifting from construction to real estate investments. I knew enough about business to sense that it wasn't just expansion. It was controlled. During one dinner at their place, Diana brought up my design work with an indulgent smile. She said she had looked at my portfolio online and thought I had potential. But if I wanted to attract better clients, I should learn how to brand myself. She offered to introduce me to one of her friends who specialized in image consulting. I thanked her, but declined. She tilted her head and said, "Some people confuse pride with independence." Dad laughed softly at her comment, not realizing how much it stung. That night, I lay awake replaying the conversation, wondering when my life had become something she could edit. The next week, I decided to visit the company office downtown. The receptionist looked surprised to see me, but let me in. David's office door was closed. I knocked once and entered without waiting. He was sitting behind the large glass desk, his suit immaculate, his hair slicked back. Diana was there too, flipping through folders. The air felt heavy. She looked up first, her voice sweet. "Annie, what a surprise." David frowned slightly, like he was unsure if he should be pleased or irritated. I told him I had come to bring some of Mom's old architectural sketches, something he had asked for months ago. He hesitated before taking them. Diana reached out and said she would have the files stored properly in their archives. I handed them over, feeling like I had just given away something sacred. David thanked me and mentioned he was in a meeting soon. I understood the dismissal. On my way out, I saw the company's new name etched in the glass wall. Clark Real Estate Development. The word Benton was gone. Driving home, I tried to convince myself it was progress, that maybe Diana's ideas were modernizing him, helping him move forward. But deep down, I knew she was tightening the circle around him, one decision at a time. Weeks passed before I saw them again. When I did, it was at a fundraiser in River North. The rooms sparkled with champagne glasses and expensive perfume. I found Dad talking to a group of investors. He seemed comfortable, confident, but not like the man who used to teach me to build things with my hands. Diana appeared beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, directing the conversation with ease. When she noticed me, she smiled as if I were an unexpected guest rather than family. "Annie, you look lovely," she said. I nodded, thanked her, and turned to Dad. He introduced me as my daughter, the designer, in the same tone someone might use to introduce a colleague. Later that night, I overheard two women talking near the bar. One of them asked if Diana had always been involved in the company. The other laughed and said, "She's the reason it still exists. Rick Clark is lucky to have her." My stomach turned. After the event, I offered to drive Dad home, but Diana declined. And their driver was waiting. Dad kissed my cheek distractedly and told me not to worry about him. I watched their car pull away, the tinted windows reflecting the city lights, and felt an ache I couldn't name. The next morning, I went to the bank to sort out some paperwork related to Mom's estate. The clerk told me politely that the account linked to her trust had been transferred to a joint account under Richard and Diana Clark. I felt my throat tighten. I asked how that could happen. She said the executor of the estate had full authority, and since my dad was the executor, it was perfectly legal. I left the bank shaking, unable to decide whether I was angrier at him or at myself for not noticing sooner. When I confronted him, he seemed genuinely confused. He said Diana had helped him organize finances, that everything was still safe, that I should be grateful she was taking care of things. I asked if he even knew how much was in those accounts. He sighed and said, "You've always been too suspicious. She's part of the family now." That conversation marked a turning point. Afterward, I started keeping my distance. Phone calls became shorter. Visits turned into obligations. The last time I went over, she was hosting a dinner for one of Dad's clients. When I arrived, she introduced me as Annie, our independent one, then asked if I could help serve dessert. I did it silently, because arguing in front of strangers felt beneath me. Later that evening, while Dad walked a guest to the door, she leaned close and whispered so softly I almost thought I imagined it. "You should be careful not to look jealous. It's not attractive." I didn't answer. I just looked at her, really looked, and saw a flash of satisfaction in her eyes. That was when I realized she enjoyed this. The small humiliations, the subtle wins. When I left that night, Dad followed me to the car. He asked if everything was fine. I wanted to tell him the truth, to make him see what she was doing, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said I was tired. He smiled gently, the same way he used to when I was a child, and said, "You work too hard. Be careful not to end up alone." Driving back through the dark streets, I felt something close in me. Not anger, not even grief, just a cold understanding that I couldn't save him. I could only choose not to drown beside him. That winter, when I passed the house again, I saw new lights on the porch and the faint outline of a camera blinking at the door. I knew then that whatever family we once were had been quietly replaced by something else. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked between bills and catalogs, printed on thick cream paper that smelled faintly of pine. My name was written in my dad's handwriting, but the message inside carried Diana's tone. It read simply, "We would love for you to join us for Christmas dinner. Formal attire. 6 o'clock. No signature, no warmth, no note from him. I held it for a long moment, trying to decide whether it was a peace offering or another test. Snow fell outside the window, drifting past the glass like slow-moving ash. The world looked quiet, but inside me there was a low, steady hum of hesitation. After everything that had happened, why invite me now? For almost a week, I kept the card on my kitchen counter. I passed it every morning while making coffee, every night while washing dishes. Each time I thought about throwing it away, something in me stopped. Maybe it was the part of me that still remembered Dad's laugh, or maybe it was guilt. That small voice that whispered not to give up on family. On the 7th day, I gave in. I called him first. He answered after 3 rings, his voice polite but distant, as if he had been expecting a telemarketer instead of me. I told him I got the invitation. There was a pause long enough for me to hear him breathe. "I'm glad," he said finally. "It would mean a lot if you came." I wanted to ask if it was really his idea, but the words caught in my throat. He sounded tired, older than I remembered. I said I'd think about it. Before hanging up, he added softly, "It would be nice to have you home again." Annie. That word, home, lingered in the air long after the line went dead. That night, I pulled out a small suitcase and started laying out clothes. I told myself I was only preparing in case I decided to go, but by the time I folded my dress and set my heels beside it, I already knew I would. The next few days passed in a blur of errands and second thoughts. I bought a bottle of Cabernet from a shop on North Halstead Street, the same brand Dad used to favor. I wrapped a gift, a leather-bound photo album filled with pictures of Mom, thinking maybe he needed a reminder of what used to matter. On Christmas Eve, I stood in front of the mirror trying on different earrings. Nothing felt right. Every reflection looked like someone pretending to belong. I finally chose a simple pair of pearls Mom had left me and slipped them on. The clock read 5:15 when I stepped outside. Snow had started again, light and steady, the kind that made everything look softer than it really was. The drive to Winnetka took almost an hour. The closer I got, the quieter it became. Houses glowed with decorations, their windows framed by warm yellow lights. When I turned onto Sheridan Road, the sight of Dad's house hit me with an ache I wasn't prepared for. It looked even larger than I remembered. The lawn trimmed perfectly, a tall spruce in the yard covered in gold ornaments. Through the front window, I could see movement, flashes of red dresses and black suits. I parked near the gate and sat for a minute, watching my breath cloud the windshield. I thought about turning around. I thought about driving until the road disappeared behind me. But then I pictured Dad waiting, maybe hoping I would walk through the door, and I couldn't do it. I stepped out of the car, my heels sinking into the snow, and made my way up the long path to the front porch. The door opened before I could knock. Diana stood there, flawless as ever, wearing a deep green velvet gown that shimmered under the porch light. Her smile was wide, polished, her tone sweet. "Annie, what a lovely surprise." She leaned in to kiss the air beside my cheek. I forced a smile and handed her the wine. "I didn't want to be late," I said. She laughed lightly, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You look beautiful. I almost didn't recognize you." The compliment landed like an insult dressed in silk. Inside, the house glowed with warm light and expensive decorations. Every surface gleamed, every detail carefully arranged. The smell of roasted meat and cinnamon filled the air. Guests milled around the living room holding glasses of champagne. I recognized a few of them. Most were from her side, people with perfect posture and polite laughter. When I spotted Dad across the room, my chest tightened. He looked older, but sharp, his silver hair perfectly combed, his suit crisp. He smiled when he saw me and came over, hugging me quickly. "I'm glad you came, sweetheart," he said, but his eyes darted toward Diana, as if checking her approval. "Dinner is almost ready," she announced to the guests, her voice floating above the room. She took Dad's arm, guiding him toward the dining room. I followed, the sound of my heels echoing softly on the hardwood floor. The table was long enough to fit 20 people, dressed with white linen, silver flatware, and tall candles flickering in crystal holders. A chandelier hung overhead, scattering light across polished wine glasses. At the center, a bouquet of red roses sat where Mom used to place her homemade centerpiece of pine cones and holly. I found myself looking for familiar things and finding none. A server directed me toward a seat near the far end of the table. I hesitated, scanning the arrangement. The chair beside Dad was still empty. The one that used to be mine. The same one Mom let me sit in when I was a child, saying I should keep him company. I wondered if Diana remembered that. Probably she did. She remembered everything that helped her win. I sat down where the server pointed, though the distance between me and my dad felt like another room entirely. Conversation hummed around me. People discussed stock portfolios, ski trips, and new restaurants in the city. No one asked about me, which was a relief. I focused on my plate, trying not to feel invisible. After a while, Dad raised his glass for a toast. His voice carried easily, smooth and confident. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he said. "It's been a year of change, and I'm grateful for those who stood by me." His gaze swept the room, but didn't stop on me. Diana smiled up at him with adoration so convincing, it almost seemed real. I lifted my glass automatically, though the words rang hollow. Change. Gratitude. They sounded like the script of someone else's life. When the toast ended, the guests applauded politely, and the clinking of cutlery began again. I took a sip of wine and felt its warmth spread through me. Halfway through dinner, Diana leaned toward me, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "I hope tonight can be a fresh start for all of us." I looked at her and nodded, though I didn't trust her meaning. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. As dessert plates were cleared, she placed a manicured hand on my arm and said she wanted to show me something after dinner. A surprise. I asked what it was, but she only said I'd see soon enough. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and laughter that, didn't include me. When I finally excused myself to the restroom, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized them. Woman, staring back. I splashed cold water on my face and whispered, "You can get through this. Just a few more hours." When I returned, Diana was standing near the head of the table, arranging something. The guests were gathering their coats, preparing to leave. She looked up and smiled that same knowing smile. "Don't go yet, Annie. There's one more thing I want you to see." I froze, unsure if it was curiosity or dread that kept me standing there. She motioned toward the chair beside my dad's, the one still empty. Her eyes glinted in the candlelight. "I saved you a seat." The moment she said she saved me a seat, I knew it wasn't kindness. The way her lips curved told me everything I needed to know. The guests were leaving, laughter fading toward the foyer, coats being handed out by a server in a black vest. The room felt emptier, but not quieter. The chandelier hummed faintly above us, its crystals trembling as if they could sense what was coming. Diana stood by the chair beside my dad's, her hand resting lightly on its back. She looked like a hostess preparing for a show. Dad was speaking to one of his clients near the door, his voice polite, detached, unaware. I walked closer, drawn not by curiosity, but by the dull pull of inevitability. When she told me to sit, her tone was soft, coaxing, but beneath it was steel. I hesitated. The chair gleamed under the chandelier, upholstered in white fabric, the same one Mom used to polish every Christmas. My chest tightened. I could still see her there, cutting slices of pie, telling Dad not to work too much, laughing when I spilled cocoa. For a second, I almost believed that memory could protect me. I pulled the chair out gently and sat. Diana smiled, satisfied, and moved to stand behind me. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder. The gesture looked affectionate to anyone watching, but her fingers pressed down just enough to feel like a warning. David turned from across the room, his eyes landing on the two of us. His expression flickered, confusion, irritation, then something colder. He walked toward the table, his polished shoes clicking on the floor. The guests near the door stopped talking, sensing tension in the air. I wanted to stand, to walk away before it began, but my legs felt locked. He stopped beside me. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then his voice, low but clear, cut through the silence. "Get up." I looked at him, unsure if I heard right. His jaw tightened. "Get up, Annie." I didn't move. The memory of every Christmas before this one, every smile, every promise of family, crashed through me all at once. I whispered, "Why?" His face reddened. "Because that seat belongs to your stepmother." There was no mistaking the sound that followed. Chairs shifting, glasses clinking, a small gasp from someone standing nearby. I tried to hold his gaze, searching for any sign of the dad who once carried me on his shoulders. Through a snowstorm so I wouldn't ruin my shoes. But he wasn't there. The man in front of me was someone else entirely. When I didn't move fast enough, his hand came down hard on the back of the chair. The push wasn't violent, but sharp, enough to knock the chair legs against the rug and throw me off balance. My knee hit the floor first, then my palm. The wine glass beside me toppled, red liquid spreading across the white linen like blood. Someone laughed. I couldn't tell who. The sound sliced through me. I stayed where I was, frozen, feeling the sting of the marble through my thin dress. Dad's voice came again, colder now. "Don't make a scene." For a moment, I thought I might cry. The tears burned behind my eyes, desperate to fall, but something heavier held them back. I rose slowly, my legs unsteady, brushed the dust from my palms, and looked at him. He couldn't meet my eyes. Diana stepped forward, her expression soft with false concern. "It's all right," she said. She didn't mean anything by it. Her words were gentle, but her smile was triumphant. Everyone was watching, some awkward, some pretending not to. I could feel the weight of their pity and amusement pressing on my skin. I reached for the back of the chair to steady myself, then let go. I didn't say a word. Not to her, not to him. The silence between us felt heavier than any scream. I turned and began walking toward the door. My heels clicked on the floor, echoing in the hollow room. Someone whispered something behind me. Another laugh, maybe nervous, maybe cruel. I didn't care anymore. I just needed air. Outside, the cold night wrapped around me. The snow had started again, thin flakes catching in my hair. My breath came out in small clouds. I crossed the porch, stepped down the icy stairs, and kept walking until the sound of the house faded. My car waited near the curb, half covered in snow. I opened the door and sat behind the wheel, gripping it tightly until my hands stopped shaking. Through the windshield, the house glowed warm and golden. I could see shadows moving inside, silhouettes of people still laughing, still living as if nothing had happened. A memory flashed. Dad teaching me how to drive, his hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, telling me to trust myself, to never let anyone else take control. I almost smiled at the irony. I started the engine. The heater hummed, filled the car with a faint smell of gasoline and pine from the air freshener. I looked down at my hands. One of my nails was broken, a small streak of red wine staining my wrist. The sight of it made something inside me settle. Quiet, but certain. I wasn't going to cry. I had cried enough for them years ago. As I pulled away from the curb, headlights swept across the snow. The road ahead stretched long and empty. My phone buzzed once in the passenger seat, a notification from an unknown number. I ignored it. Driving through the quiet streets, I thought about the chair. It had always been more than furniture. It was the one piece of home that had survived everything. It was where Mom sat when she helped me with homework, where Dad once read the paper every morning, where we celebrated every birthday and holiday. Tonight, it became something else entirely, a symbol of everything that was gone. When I reached the edge of town, I stopped at a red light and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The world outside looked almost peaceful. Snow glittered under the streetlights. Somewhere, faint music drifted from another house. A Christmas song playing too slow to recognize. I whispered to myself, "It's just a chair," repeating the words they used to wound me. But saying them out loud felt different. It didn't sound like surrender anymore. It sounded like a release. I kept driving until the highway opened wide and the city skyline appeared in. The distance. The lights shimmered against the dark lake, familiar and indifferent. I rolled down the window, letting the cold air sting my face. The tears that had refused to fall earlier finally came. Not in sobs, but quiet and steady, like the snow outside. When I reached my apartment, I parked and sat there for a long time. The clock on the dashboard showed 1:20 in the morning. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked calm, almost detached. I thought of calling someone, maybe Ruth, the older neighbor who always left her porch light on for me. But I didn't. The silence felt cleaner. Inside, I hung up my coat and walked barefoot to the window. Below, the city was asleep, blanketed in white. I poured myself a glass of water, drank slowly, and watched the flakes swirl under the street lamp. The scene at dinner replayed again, sharper now, but less painful. Every humiliation had become a kind of clarity. I set the glass down and pressed my palm to the cool window pane. Somewhere far behind me, in that grand house filled with light and laughter, they were probably toasting another successful evening. But in that same moment, a small fracture had formed. They just didn't know it yet. I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and lay awake for a long time listening to the wind move through the city. The night no longer felt heavy. It felt like a beginning. The morning after Christmas felt quieter than it should have. The city still slept beneath a blanket of snow, but my apartment was already awake, with the sound of the heater clicking on and off. I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of coffee I hadn't touched. My hands trembled from exhaustion, not cold. Everything from the night before replayed in my mind in uneven flashes. Like a film skipping frames, the push, the laughter, the way Dad looked through me instead of at me. The memory hit in waves, sharp, humiliating, and still unreal. I tried to convince myself it was over, that I could leave it behind, like a bad dream, but the silence of the room kept pulling me back. I realized then that silence had followed me home. But this time, it felt like mine to keep. For the next few days, I avoided every call that came through. Most were numbers I didn't recognize, and I knew better than to check the voicemails. I went to work, answered client emails, even met with a contractor about a small renovation job in Lincoln Park, but I did everything on autopilot. Nights were harder. I would sit by the window, staring at the snow piling up along the curb, and replay the way Diana's hand had rested on Dad's arm as if to claim what was left of him. Each time I reached for my phone, something stopped me. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like begging. It was a week later when a knock came at my door. I hesitated before opening it. It was Ruth Kaplan, my 76-year-old neighbor from across the hall, bundled in a faded coat and holding a small plastic container. She smiled in that patient way only older women could, like she already knew I wouldn't refuse. "I made soup," she said. "Too much for one person." I stepped aside and let her in. Her apartment always smelled like lavender, but today she carried the scent of onions and thyme. She set the container on my counter and looked around. "You've been quiet," she said. "Everything is all right." I wanted to lie, to say I'd just been busy, but the words came out differently. "I had dinner with my dad," I said. "It didn't go well." She studied my face for a moment, her eyes kind but sharp. "Parents have a way of hurting us without realizing how deep they cut," she said. Then she added, "Sometimes they know exactly what they're doing." I managed a small smile. We sat for a while, sipping tea, talking about nothing important. She told me her son had stopped visiting months ago, that he called only when he needed money. I asked if she still helped him. She shrugged. "Habit, I guess." That night, after she left, I found myself thinking about her more than I expected. The next morning, I saw her in the hallway struggling with a grocery bag that had split open, cans rolling across the floor. I helped her pick them up, and when she apologized for the mess, I told her it was fine. The next day, I stopped by again, this time with a new tote bag and some pastries from the bakery on Clark Street. She insisted I stay for coffee. It became a habit, a quiet routine that filled the hours I used to spend thinking about my family. One afternoon, she asked if I could help her organize her mail. When I sat at her table, I noticed a stack of overdue bills and letters from a loan company. She tried to laugh it off, saying her son was taking care of it, but something in her voice sounded forced. I offered to look over them, and after a few minutes, I realized the payments her son had promised to make were never sent. He had been using her credit to open accounts under her name. I told her gently, expecting anger, but she just sighed. "He'll come around," she said. "He always does." I wanted to believe her, but the way her hands trembled said otherwise. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her face, about the way she kept making excuses for someone who had taken everything from her. It was too familiar. The next morning, I made a call to a friend who worked in real estate law and explained Ruth's situation. He offered advice and even sent over forms she could use to report the fraud. I printed them, walked across the hall, and explained everything. At first, she refused, afraid her son would hate her. I told her I understood, that sometimes protecting someone doesn't mean letting them keep hurting you. The words surprised me as I said them, because I realized I was talking about myself, too. Helping Ruth gave me something to focus on besides the ache of my own silence. Together, we sorted through her finances, called the bank, canceled the cards, and by the end of the week, she looked lighter, as if she could finally breathe again. One evening, she handed me an old photo of her when she was young, standing beside her husband in front of a small house in Wisconsin. "He built that porch with his hands," she said proudly. Then she looked at me and added, "You remind me of him. Quiet, but strong." Her words stayed with me long after I left her apartment. That night, I sat on my own couch and thought about what strength actually meant. It wasn't shouting, or fighting back, or proving anything. Sometimes it was walking away and choosing not to carry their weight anymore. I realized I hadn't said my dad's name out loud in days. That silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. One snowy evening, about 2 weeks after the dinner, I was walking home from a client meeting when I saw a familiar car parked outside my building. My chest tightened. It was his, the same black sedan with the dent on the back bumper. I froze halfway up the steps. The engine was off, but the driver's seat was empty. I scanned the sidewalk, heart pounding, but no one was there, only the sound of the wind against the windows. Maybe he had been there earlier. Maybe it wasn't him at all. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had come and left without knocking. Inside, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. No name, just my address written in his careful handwriting. I carried it to the table, sat down, and opened it. Inside was a check, folded twice, for $5,000, and a note. It said, "I'm sorry about Christmas. Diana insisted you take this. Let's start over. Love, Dad. I stared at it until the words blurred. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was that he thought an apology could be bought. I folded the note back and placed it in a drawer without tearing it, though I wanted to. Then I wrote a short reply on plain paper. I said, "Thank you for the thought, but I can't accept this. I hope you're well. Annie." I walked it down to the mailbox and slid it in before I could change my mind. That night, snow fell hard, muffling the city until it sounded like the world had stopped moving. I stood at the window, watching the street lights glow faintly through the white haze. Somewhere below, Ruth's apartment light was still on. I imagined her sitting by the table, maybe feeling the same quiet relief I did. When I finally went to bed, I felt lighter than I had in years. The silence that once hurt now wrapped around me like a soft blanket. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was something closer to strength. I realized then that revenge didn't always come with noise or destruction. Sometimes it arrived quietly, disguised as peace, in the simple act of no longer needing to be heard. The first time the phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. It was early on a Friday morning, the kind of gray winter light that made everything look softer and sadder. I was still in bed, half awake, when I heard the familiar ringtone. My chest tightened before I even looked at the screen. The number wasn't saved, but I knew it by heart. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. A minute later, it started again. I turned the phone face down and closed my eyes, pretending not to care, but my pulse betrayed me. By the third call, I gave up pretending. I sat up, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, and listened to the voicemail that followed. The sound of his voice cracked through the silence. "Annie, it's me. Please call me back. I need to talk to you." His voice was low, tired, with a tremor I hadn't heard before. He sounded small, like a man who had finally run out of power. I didn't call back. Not that day, not the next. I deleted the message, but couldn't forget the tone. Over the next few days, the calls came in waves. Sometimes once in the morning, sometimes late at night. Always the same number. Always the same pattern of silence before the voicemail. The words changed slightly each time. "Please, Annie, I just need to explain." Then another. "I made a mistake. I need your help." The last one ended with the sound of him trying not to cry. I hadn't heard my dad cry since Mom's funeral. It was Ruth who finally said what I wouldn't admit out loud. "He'll keep calling until you answer," she told me one evening as we drank tea in her kitchen. "You don't have to forgive him, but maybe hearing him will help you close the door for good." I nodded, but said nothing. I wasn't sure if I wanted closure or just silence. That night, I sat by my window with the phone in my hand. The city outside was quiet under a layer of new snow. I thought about all the ways Dad had disappointed me, about the push, the laughter, the look on his face when he told me not to embarrass myself. Every memory stung like a bruise I couldn't stop touching. Still, a small part of me wanted to know why he was calling now. Regret could come too late, but it was still regret. When the phone rang again just after midnight, I answered. The line was filled with static at first. Then his voice came through, shaky and broken. "Annie, thank God. I didn't think you'd pick up." For a long moment, I said nothing. He kept talking, words spilling out in uneven breaths. "I need to see you. Something's happened. Diana's gone." Gone. That word hung in the air. I didn't ask where at first. Then I said quietly, "What do you mean, gone?" He made a sound like a laugh and a sob tangled together. "She left. She took everything. The accounts, the house, even the company. My name isn't on anything anymore. It's all in hers." The silence that followed was so deep I could hear the hum of my refrigerator. He said again, "I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. For a second, pity almost reached me, but it passed. I asked how he could let it happen. He said she told him it was for tax purposes, for convenience, for love. I could hear him breaking as he spoke. He said the lawyers couldn't find her, that she had moved the money overseas, that there were debts he didn't even know existed. He said people were calling, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits. I let him talk until he ran out of words. When he finally went quiet, I said, "You pushed me out of my chair in front of your friends, Dad. Do you remember that?" He didn't answer right away. Then, in a whisper, "Yes, I remember. I'm so sorry." His voice cracked on the last word. For a moment, all the years between us collapsed. I saw him not as the man who had humiliated me, but as the dad who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to fix broken toys and kiss my forehead goodnight. But that image didn't last. I said softly, "You made your choice." Then I hung up. He called again the next day, and the next. Sometimes he left voicemails too long to finish listening to. Once he even came to my building, leaving a note with the doorman saying he just wanted to talk. I didn't see him. I couldn't. Every apology felt like another plea for rescue, not for forgiveness. Weeks passed. One afternoon, I was walking home from the grocery store when I saw a familiar figure sitting on the bench across from my building. It took me a second to recognize him. His hair had thinned. His coat hung loose. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette. For a moment, I froze on the sidewalk, torn between crossing the street and running the other way. He looked up, and our eyes met through the falling snow. He started to stand, but I shook my head slightly. He sat back down, understanding. That night, I found another message waiting on my phone. His voice was soft, defeated. "I understand if you can't forgive me. I just wanted you to know I was proud of you, even when I didn't say it. I shouldn't have let her do what she did. I thought I was building a family. I didn't see what I was destroying." There was a pause, then a long exhale. "Take care of yourself, Annie. I love you." I listened to that voicemail twice before deleting it. I didn't cry. The pain didn't come like it used to. It settled somewhere deep, familiar but no longer raw. I thought about how he had lost everything, the same way he had lost me. Not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Later that week, Ruth and I sat on her couch watching the evening news. A headline scrolled across the screen about a real estate fraud investigation. A familiar name appeared briefly at the bottom, before the anchor moved on to the next story. I said nothing, but my chest tightened. Karma had finally found her. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I almost ignored it until I saw the message. It was from one of Dad's old business contacts, someone I hadn't heard from in years. He said Dad had been taken to the hospital. Nothing serious, just stress and exhaustion. I stood in my kitchen staring at the message until the words blurred. I didn't go to the hospital. Instead, I wrote a short note and mailed it to his address in Winnetka. It said, "I hope you get better. Take care of yourself. Annie." No anger, no apology, no promise to visit. Just the truth I could live with. That evening, I walked to the lakefront. The water was dark and still, a thin layer of ice forming near the edge. The air bit at my face, but I stayed, watching the lights of the city shimmer across the surface. Somewhere out there was the man who had called me crying, the man who finally understood what it meant to be alone. I didn't wish him pain. I didn't wish him happiness either. I wished him awareness. As I turned to leave, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of pine and salt from the lake. It reminded me of that night long ago when he had lifted me to see the first snow. I realized that no matter how far we had fallen from each other, some memories would always stay untouched. But that didn't mean I had to keep living inside them. When I got home, I took one last look at my phone before setting it face down on the counter. The calls had stopped. The silence that followed didn't hurt. It felt clean, like the air after a storm. I hadn't planned on going back to Winnetka. Weeks had passed since the calls stopped, and I had begun to believe that silence meant peace. But one afternoon in early February, an envelope arrived with no return address, just my name written in my dad's handwriting. Inside was a short note. "I'd like to see you, if only once more. I need to talk to you face to face, please." There was no apology, no explanation, only that single request. I folded the note and stared at it for a long time. Outside, snow had started again. The soft kind that fell without wind, the kind that made everything feel slowed and still. I didn't know if I wanted to see him, but something in his words sounded final, like a door about to close. The next morning, I packed an overnight bag and drove north. The highway was slick with slush, and the gray sky hung low over the lake. By the time I reached the familiar neighborhood, the clouds had thickened into a dull white ceiling. His house looked smaller than I remembered. The front gate hung slightly open, and the once perfect hedges were brown and uneven. I parked by the curb and sat for a minute, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. Then I took a deep breath and got out. The walkway hadn't been shoveled in days. I crunched through the snow until I reached the porch. The same brass handle gleamed on the door, but the wreath was gone, leaving a faint circle where it used to hang. I rang the bell and waited. When the door opened, I barely recognized him. David stood there in an old cardigan, his shoulders stooped, eyes ringed with exhaustion. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said my name, almost a whisper. Annie. I nodded once and stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit me first, heavy with the smell of dust and stale air. Most of the furniture was gone. The walls that had once been lined with paintings and mirrors were bare, except for faint outlines where they had hung. He motioned toward the kitchen. The table was cluttered with unopened mail and a single coffee mug. He pushed some papers aside so I could sit. He looked smaller somehow, as if time had folded in on him. I noticed his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the mug. He started to speak, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. Finally, he said, "She's gone for good. Sold the last property, emptied every account, even pawned the jewelry I gave her." His voice cracked. I tried to track her down, but it's like she vanished. I stayed quiet. He stared at his hands, then continued. "I thought she loved me. I thought I was giving us a future. Turns out, I was signing everything away." He gave a soft, bitter laugh that sounded like a cough. I said quietly, "You didn't want to believe anyone who tried to warn you." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I know. I thought you were jealous." He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the man I remembered from childhood, stripped of pride. "I'm sorry for that night," he said. "Christmas. I was angry, embarrassed. She told me you were trying to make a scene. I don't even know why I listened." His hands trembled again, and he gripped the edge of the table to steady them. I wanted to say, "I forgive you," but the words felt too simple for everything between us. The silence stretched until it became heavy. I looked around the kitchen and noticed something missing. The old cherry wood chair, the one that had started it all, wasn't there. I asked where it went. He gestured toward the garage. "I couldn't look at it anymore," he said. "Every time I did, I saw what I'd done." I stood and walked to the garage door. The space smelled faintly of oil and cold air. There, under a sheet, was the chair. I pulled the cover back. The wood was dull, the polish faded, one leg slightly cracked. I ran my hand over the surface, feeling the grooves Mom's rings had left in the finish. That chair had carried years of laughter and arguments, meals and holidays, and one moment of shame that neither of us could erase. Dad appeared behind me, leaning against the doorframe. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I remember everything, every word, every look, every second after you walked out. I haven't slept right since." I turned to face him. He looked frail, but his voice was steady. "I tried to start over," he said softly. "But life doesn't give do-overs, does it?" I shook my head. "Not really." He smiled weakly, then said something I didn't expect. "You were always stronger than me. I never saw it before. I used to think silence meant weakness. Now I think it might be the only kind of strength left." His words landed like stones in my chest. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but my body stayed still. We stood there in the dim garage for what felt like a long time. Finally, he said, "I sold the house. The papers are being finalized. I'm moving out next week." "Where will you go?" He shrugged. "Maybe somewhere quieter. I'm too tired for cities." When we went back inside, he poured 2 cups of coffee, black and bitter. We sat at the bare table without speaking. The silence between us felt different this time. It wasn't angry or uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when everything damaged is still standing, just quieter. Before I left, he walked me to the door. The light outside was already fading, the snow beginning again. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I don't deserve it," he said, "but thank you for coming." I opened my mouth to reply, but couldn't find words that fit. Instead, I reached out and touched his arm gently. He covered my hand with his for a brief moment before letting go. As I walked down the path, the sound of the door closing behind me felt final. I turned once and looked back at the house. The windows glowed faintly through the snow, and for a heartbeat, I imagined Mom standing there, watching us both with that patient smile she used to have when we fought. Then the image faded. Driving home, the sky turned dark, and the highway lights shimmered in the snowfall. My reflection in the windshield looked calm, almost at peace. I thought about the chair in the garage, covered again, waiting for no one. That chair used to belong to my mom. Now it belonged to no one. When I reached my apartment, I didn't feel relief or sadness, just quiet. I hung my coat, turned on the small lamp in the living room, and sat for a long time listening to the hum of the radiator. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was the last time I would see him, and that realization didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It just felt necessary, like closing a book whose story had already been told. The letter arrived in late March, written in the same careful handwriting that had once signed my school report. Cards. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, no hint of urgency, yet something about the weight of it made my hands tremble. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, and when I opened it, the words hit me harder than I expected. He thanked me for coming to see him and said it had meant more than I would ever know. He wrote that he was leaving Chicago, moving to a small cabin near Lake Geneva, to spend his remaining time quietly. At the end, in smaller letters, he added, "If you ever find forgiveness in your heart, that will be enough. Love, Dad." I read it twice before setting it on the table. The sunlight from the window caught the edge of the paper, making the ink shimmer faintly. Outside, the snow had melted, replaced by the first hesitant signs of spring. I sat there for a long time, feeling both lighter and strangely hollow. There was nothing left to fix. He was alive, but in every way that mattered, he had already begun to disappear. Weeks passed. My work picked up again. Clients calling, deadlines stacking, life returning to its steady rhythm. Ruth came by often with her quiet humor and her endless jars of homemade jam. Sometimes we sat by her window, talking about her garden, about the past, about the strange peace that comes after letting go. She told me her son had finally reached out, apologizing for what he'd done. I asked if she forgave him. She smiled and said forgiveness was a gift you give yourself, not the other person. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew she was right. One rainy morning in April, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Pastor Miller from a small church in Wisconsin. He said he was sorry to deliver bad news, that my dad had passed away quietly in his sleep 2 nights earlier. The words sank slowly, like stones in water. I thanked him, asked about arrangements, and wrote down the address of the church. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the rain sliding down the glass. There was no shock, no outburst, just a quiet ache that filled every corner of the room. 2 days later, I drove north again. The road curved along the lake, the air damp and heavy with mist. The church was small, white paint peeling from the sides, surrounded by tall pines. Only a handful of people were there, most of them locals who had known him briefly. The pastor led me to a small table where a framed photo stood beside an urn. It was a picture of him smiling, taken years ago at a company event. He looked strong, confident, untouched by the years that would come after. After the short service, I stayed behind while the others left. The pastor handed me a sealed envelope that Dad had left for me. He said my dad had given it to him weeks earlier, asking it be delivered only if something happened. I thanked him and walked outside. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. I sat on a bench beneath a tree and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in that same steady hand, though shakier now. "Annie," it began, "by the time you read this, I'll be where words don't reach anymore. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope I've earned your peace. I was blind for too long, letting someone else's charm erase what truly mattered. When she left, I thought I lost everything. It took me longer than it should have to realize that what I lost first was you. You were right to walk away. I see that now." There was a pause in the writing, a smudge where the ink had blurred. Then it continued. "I kept the chair, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I fixed the broken leg last week. It's waiting for you in the cabin. If you want it, it's yours. If not, leave it. Either way, it will be where it belongs. Thank you for being the kind of daughter I was too proud to deserve. Love, Dad. By the time I finished reading, my hands were trembling. The rain had turned to a soft drizzle. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. For a long time, I just sat there listening to the rain against the trees. There were no tears, only a strange calmness spreading through me, like something inside had finally unclenched. That afternoon, I drove to the cabin. It was smaller than I imagined, perched on a quiet road near the lake. The front porch sagged slightly, and a faded mailbox leaned by the path. I found the key under a stone by the step, exactly where he said it would be. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Everything was simple, stripped down to the essentials, as if he had been trying to live lightly. In the corner of the small living room stood the chair, restored. The cherry wood gleamed softly, its crack filled and polished smooth. A folded plaid blanket rested across the back. I walked over and ran my hand along the armrest. The wood was cool under my fingers, but it held warmth too, the kind that came from years of being touched, used, remembered. For the first time, I didn't see it as a symbol of what had been taken from me. It was just a chair again. I sat down, slowly, almost afraid it would break under me. It didn't. The floor creaked softly, the only sound in the quiet cabin. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the memories come. The sound of Mom's laughter, the warmth of holiday lights, the smell of roast and pine. Even the memory of that Christmas night flickered briefly, but it didn't hurt anymore. It just existed, part of a larger story that had finally found its ending. When I opened my eyes, the sun was breaking through the clouds, scattering light across the lake outside the window. The reflection shimmered on the surface of the chair, and I realized something simple but profound. I hadn't come here for closure. I had come to remember, without pain. Before leaving, I wrote a short note and left it on the table beside the chair. It said, "I forgive you." Then I locked the cabin door behind me and stood on the porch, breathing in the scent of wet wood and early spring. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells from across the water, soft and distant. Driving back to Chicago, the road felt shorter somehow. The weight I had carried for years seemed to dissolve, mile by mile. I passed the city limits just as the sun was setting, the sky streaked with gold and gray. I thought of the empty chair waiting in the quiet cabin and realized it wasn't empty at all. It held everything that once was, everything that had been broken and somehow made whole again. Maine drifted across the city that morning in thin silver lines, soft enough to blur the world outside my window. I woke before sunrise, the light barely touching the edges of the buildings. And for a long moment I lay still, listening to the quiet pulse of the room. The air smelled of cooling coffee grounds from the pot I forgot to empty the night before. My breathing felt slow and steady, and it struck me that for the first time in years, the silence around me did not feel like something I needed to fill. It felt earned. It felt like the world had finally taken its hands off my shoulders. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and let the soft hum of the city drift in. If you are listening to this, I wonder what your morning looks like. Maybe you are making breakfast, sitting in your car, or just lying in your own quiet room like I was, realizing that your life has shifted in some small way you did not expect. Eventually, I pushed myself upright and stretched, feeling the gentle ache in my back that comes from sleeping deeply. The kettle hissed when I turned it on, and the sound was comforting. When the steam rose and curled through the air, I poured my coffee slowly, letting the warmth fill my hands through the mug. The rain eased into a light mist that brushed the window like a whisper. I stood there for a long while, sipping slowly, feeling the morning settle into me. It had been weeks since I returned from the cabin near Lake Geneva. I stood in my dad's empty living room, listening to the quiet echo of a house no longer shaped by someone else's power. Weeks after I sat in the chair he restored, the same chair that had once been the center of my humiliation and now held something entirely different. Closure, maybe. Or forgiveness, or simply an understanding that life bends in ways we never expect until the moment comes when we can finally breathe again. By mid-morning, the rain had lightened, leaving the sidewalks damp and shining. I put on a light sweater and stepped outside. The air had that cool, early spring freshness, the kind that carries both the memory of winter and the promise of something new. I walked toward the lake, letting my steps follow the rhythm of the water. I could already hear in the distance. When I reached the shoreline, a soft wind brushed across my face. The lake moved gently, a thin ripple of silver stretching toward the horizon. I took a seat on a wooden bench and folded my hands in my lap. This spot had become a place of quiet for me, a place where my thoughts did not feel chaotic or heavy. Across the path, an older couple walked slowly, sharing an umbrella. A runner passed with steady breaths. A small dog tugged its owner toward a patch of wet grass. Life went on around me in small, tender movements. I leaned back and let my mind drift to thoughts of my dad. I thought of the sound of his laugh when I was a child, the way his shoulders shook when something truly amused him. I thought of him fixing the porch swing, hammering nails with focused care. I thought of how he danced with Mom in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. Those memories rose softly, tinged with warmth rather than pain. Then came the harder memories, the distance, the pride, the silence that widened between us year after year. The Christmas dinner, his hand against the chair, the sound of laughter that still rang in my bones. For a long time, those moments had carried more weight than anything good that came before them. But sitting by the lake with the breeze lifting strands of my hair, I felt a shift inside me. The memories did not hurt in the same sharp way. They existed like pages in a book I had finally finished reading. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill my chest. Forgiveness does not arrive in one clear moment. It comes slowly, like dawn, touching everything in soft light, until you realize you can finally see again. It was nearly noon when I noticed someone waving from a nearby bench. It was Ruth. She wore her thick brown coat and a knitted hat pulled low over her ears. I waved back, and she motioned for me to join her. I crossed the path and sat beside her. She smiled in that gentle, knowing way she always did. "You look lighter today," she said. I laughed quietly and told her the truth. I felt lighter. She nodded as if she had already known that. She pulled out a small thermos and poured tea for both of us. The steam drifted into the air between us, carrying the scent of mint. We talked about simple things at first. Her herbs had started sprouting again. A neighbor's cat had climbed onto her balcony. The church choir she listened to on Sunday mornings had improved. Then the conversation deepened. She asked if I had dreams about my dad. I nodded. Some were painful. Some were peaceful. Some were nothing more than images, thin as smoke. She listened the way only older women can, with patience and tenderness, without trying to fix anything. After a long pause, she said something I have never forgotten. Sometimes the people we lose are not the ones who die. They are the ones who leave us long before their last breath. But letting them go is not the same as forgetting them. It is simply choosing to live your life without carrying their mistakes on. You're back. Her words drifted into me like warm light. I rested my hand on hers and thanked her. We stayed on the bench until the clouds parted and sunlight spilled across. The lake. I told her about the cabin, the restored chair, and the photograph my dad left for me. She shook her head softly, her eyes misting. "That was his way of giving you a beginning," she said, "not an end." When I walked home, the air felt lighter. The city moved with a gentle buzz, people stepping around puddles, cars sending ripples across wet pavement. I stopped at a bakery and bought a small loaf of warm bread for Ruth, then climbed the stairs to my apartment. The hallway smelled of fresh paint. The building had contractors in recently, and the scent had a strange way of reminding me of Dad's workbench, where sawdust always clung to the air. Inside my apartment, I set the bread on the counter and opened the windows to let in the afternoon light. The breeze lifted the curtains and filled the room with the scent of spring. I walked to the bookshelf and picked up the framed photograph from the cabin. The picture showed my parents in a moment of effortless happiness. Mom's hand rested on Dad's chest, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. I traced their faces slowly, feeling a deep calm settle through me. I placed the frame back in its spot and sat down on my favorite chair. The cushion felt soft beneath me, the fabric warm from the sunlight. I curled my legs beneath me and let my thoughts wander. I saw my younger self at the dinner table, swinging my feet under the chair. I saw myself in college, running late for class. I saw myself last winter, standing outside my dad's house with snow falling around me, feeling more alone than I had ever felt. Then I saw myself now, steady, breathing deeply, surrounded by a quiet I no longer feared. Peace does not erase the past. It simply takes away its power. As the afternoon faded into early evening, the city lights flickered on one by one. I made tea and stood by the window watching the sky turn shades of violet and gold. Somewhere below, someone laughed loudly, the sound rising up through the courtyard like a bright spark. I smiled without thinking. I sat at my desk as the last of the daylight slipped behind the buildings. I took out a notebook and began writing my story. Not to publish, not to send, just to lay the memories down so they did not have to live in the quiet corners of my mind anymore. Words came easily. The pain had softened enough to let me speak without breaking. I wrote until my hand ached and the page was filled. Then I closed the notebook and exhaled slowly. Later, I lit a candle in the living room. The soft glow filled the room, and I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. I thought about the long path that had brought me here, about the chair that started it all, about the silence that once suffocated me and later saved me. If you are still listening, thank you for walking with me this far. And if any part of this story touched something in you, you are not alone. Maybe you have known a kind of silence like mine. Maybe you have been told to dim yourself for someone else's comfort. Maybe you are learning how to forgive, not for them, but for your own peace. If you feel comfortable, share your story in the comments. I would love to know where you are listening from, what part of this touched your heart, or what silence you stepped away from. And if you want more stories like this, feel free to like and subscribe so they find you when you need them most. And remember this as you go. If anyone has ever told you that you were too much or not enough for your own family, silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me what integrity means to you and where you are listening from tonight.